was no purpose to be served by this ongoing incarceration. And can I say that when I spoke with Mr Assange tonight, he described it as a surreal and happy moment, his landing here in our national capital, Canberra. He expressed his thanks to what he described as the diplomatic A-team when I spoke about the role that Kevin and Stephen have been able to play.
Prime Minister. You talked about your view that this had gone on for too long. Do you think previous Prime Ministers, previous governments have been negligent to allow it to drag on so long instead of advocating as strongly as you've done?
Oh, look, what's important, I'm responsible for my job. My job is to advocate for Australian citizens. Chang Leia's home, Sean Turnella's home. One of the things that my government does is at times as well, we don't shout, we're not in a contest of machismo. What we do is we get things done. And my government advocated strategically, patiently, in a calibrated way, and we achieved this outcome.
Prime Minister, just a couple of quick questions. Can you confirm that you expect to meet Mr Assange in the next day or so? And secondly, could you give us a sense...
Sorry, you expect, you didn't conclude.
Will you be meeting him in the next day or so? And also, what point did you actually realise that this was going to happen? You've been working on it for a couple of years. Was it a conversation with Joe Biden? Was a message sent from State Department of Foreign Affairs? How did that play out?
Well, it played out over a long period of time. I've said that I have raised it at every opportunity at the highest level. I know that I've received a message from the US ambassador here that they are also pleased that this has been resolved. The first time I raised it was with President Biden at the NATO summit in Madrid. I raised it also with other senior members of the US administration. But this was always the case, to be very clear, that because of the separation between the political representatives and the judiciary, this was always going to be something that required discussion, patient with the Department of Justice. And certainly over that period of time there has been an issue as well. I've exchanged very directly with Mr Assange's lawyers, as have our diplomatic representatives. And Mr Assange's lawyers have been very determined to achieve an outcome, and of course the nature of his incarceration in Belmarsh has meant that then communication had to then be got through. Stephen Smith, our High Commissioner, has visited him on a number of occasions. The details of the plea deal were worked through over a period of time. But what we have been focused on very clearly, and for some of the issues that have raised with me, it was the case that this was the only way that I could see a resolution being achieved. And the objective here was to conclude these matters. They have been concluded. They've been concluded in a way that has achieved the outcome that was sought, which is Julian Assange is now home here in Australia.
Just following up on Ms James's question, do you plan to meet with Mr Assange in coming days?
I've got Parliament tomorrow, so I'll be here tomorrow. I'm not going to assist. I'm aware of Mr Assange's movements in coming days, but I'm not about to. That's a matter for his personal privacy. Obviously, he's been through a considerable ordeal. It's up to him when he makes a statement I was pleased to speak with him immediately upon the wheels touching the ground. I was quite pleased to be the first person here who he spoke with, which was mutually worked out that would occur. And while we're in this press conference, while some people are watching the plane and whether Mr Assange has exited the plane, other people will be focused on kick-off.
Have you spoken to the US President since there was a breakthrough, and how do you think this result will shape the US-Australia relationship going forward, now our closest ally?
We have a very positive relationship with the United States. I regard President Biden as a friend. I regard the relationship as being absolutely central, one of the three pillars of our foreign policy here, along with our relationship in the region and our support for multilateral forums, including the United Nations. I engage, one of the things that I do, and one of the reasons why you get outcomes, is I don't come into press conferences and talk about the personal details of discussions I have.
I was going to ask whether there was a breakthrough moment or a particular turning point in these negotiations, a moment when you realised that it would be possible.
I think there were probably a number of steps along the way, to be frank.
Can you tell us anything about it?
There were moments when this required a range of decisions to be made by the Department of Justice in the United States, which of course is not subject to political influence. They're independent. If you look at the whole range of people who've been to the United States, I'm surprised that some of it was missed by the people in this room, some of the visits, but not up to me to indicate that. Go back and have a look at some diaries and who's travelled to the United States in recent months. We wanted to be focused on an outcome, and these things don't come together till they all come together. You know, there are steps it required. A plea deal requires a two-sided agreement between the Department of Justice and Julian Assange. It requires, in this case, Mr Assange to receive advice from his legal team, and we have been in contact with his legal team over a period. He had a legal team in the UK led by his longest legal advisor, Jen Robinson, who was the conduit for direct discussions with Mr Assange, but he also had a very good legal team in the United States. Kevin Rudd worked very hard, as did Stephen Smith, as did the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, as did the Attorney General, as did others as well, to achieve. Karen.
Prime Minister, the point's been made that your predecessors did not advocate for this outcome and that you have chosen to do so. And you've talked a bit about why you did that. But you've personally been very engaged since before you were even opposition leader with this. So can you tell us why you have chosen to stake so much on this, given the US relationship is so important and it must have put things under pressure at times? Why go so hard for this outcome for someone who, as you have made the point, divides the population in terms of what he did?
I believe in standing up for Australian citizens, and I make that very clear. I made it clear from the beginning. I had the same position as opposition leader on all of these issues as I've had as Prime Minister. And as Prime Minister of Australia, you have an opportunity to make a difference. I've said repeatedly across a range of areas, I'm not here to occupy the space. I'm not here necessarily to ensure that people will always be supportive by going through the details of what we are doing as we are doing them. And some people have been very critical that we weren't doing enough. What we were doing was exactly the right thing to achieve an outcome. I'm an outcomes-based politician. I believe in making a difference. We can make a difference. The United States are our friends. The United States was, of course, in a position, though, where because of the separation of powers, I believe in that as well, and have always understood that due to their system. So it wasn't as simple as me sitting down with President Biden or any other US elected representative and achieving this outcome. Diplomacy is something that must be patient, something that must be built on trust, something that works through stages. We have done that, and Mr. Assange and I this evening, as I said, I've never met Mr. Assange. I had a very warm discussion with him this evening, though. He was very generous in his praise of the Australian government's efforts. The Australian government stands up for Australian citizens. That's what we do. Thanks very much.
further down? Yep. Top of the hour every hour, these are the top stories we're following on this Wednesday. Fatima Payman crosses the floor in support of a Greens motion recognising a Palestinian state. Julian Assange freed, the WikiLeaks founder released from a UK prison and returning to Australia after reaching a plea deal with the United States. And Reform pulls ahead of the Conservatives in some polls as Labor's expected landslide UK election win edges closer. First though this hour, Fatima Payman has become the first federal Labor member in 30 years to cross the floor in Parliament after voting with the Greens to support recognising a Palestinian state. The WA Senator voted last night to support an urgency motion on the need for the Senate to recognise the State of Palestine. David Pocock and Lydia Thorpe also voted with the Greens, although the motion did not pass. Labor had earlier introduced a motion which specified a two-state solution, while the Liberals also brought their own amendment to the Senate floor. As reported by 6 News on Sunday, Payman has been considering whether to cross the floor and potentially leave Labor. Julian Assange is set to return to Australia after striking a plea deal with the US Justice Department. The WikiLeaks founder has left a London prison and will plead guilty to US charges, but will now avoid spending time in an American prison. In a statement, the federal government said, "We are aware Australian citizen Mr. Julian Assange has legal proceedings scheduled in the United States. Given those proceedings are ongoing, it is not appropriate to provide further comment." The Australian government continues to provide consular assistance to Mr. Assange. Prime Minister Albanese has been clear Mr. Assange's case has dragged on for far too long and there is nothing to be gained from his continued incarceration. Reform UK is now pulling ahead of the Conservatives in some UK election polls. Immigration and healthcare are being heavily campaigned on by all parties, including Reform, who may win several seats. 6 News international correspondent Austin Pollock breaks down the latest on the ground from London.
Preparing for a wipeout. The Tories hearing the message loud and clear. Polls predicting a July 4 thrashing. Just 72 seats are expected to be picked up by the Tories, their worst result ever, in stark contrast to the last election which saw them pick up 365 seats in a landslide majority. The current polling has the Labour Party on 41%, compared to the Conservatives with just 20%, and Reform UK with 13% of the vote. 5 megapolls conducted have given the Tories a definitive outcome of the next election. Anywhere between 53 to 155 seats are expected to be held by the Tories after polling day, but even 155 would be the party's worst result ever. The UK public not on the Conservative side.
Do you think the Conservatives have any chance of getting up?
No, I don't. Tories have been in power for many years and there's lots of things that haven't happened very well.
As we venture across the UK, we have ended up in the township of Bournemouth and Poole, about 2 hours from central London. The issues here completely different in comparison. Just a few kilometres down the road from the town centre is the Poole Quay, known for smugglers arriving along the coast and a port where thousands of immigrants and migrants are arriving daily. There's been a massive issue at the upcoming election. The Conservatives are promising to crack down on immigration, something that 43% of Britons want.
If I'm your Prime Minister, the planes will go to Rwanda, we will have a deterrent. So the simple question for Keir Starmer is, what will you do with people who come here illegally?
Keir Starmer, please respond directly to Rishi Sunak.
There's a pattern of behaviour here. He said he would get waiting lists down, they've gone up. He said he would stop the boats, we've got record numbers coming. The promises he makes are not worth the paper they're written on.
I think the problem is people inherently don't trust politicians. So it means that that whatever they say, people don't really believe it. And I suppose all you can really see is what action results in positive or negative things.
Right-wing candidate Nigel Farage, who is running much to the surprise of many, who actively campaigned for Brexit, wants to see tougher policies around immigration.
You know why? Because Labour opened the door to mass immigration on a scale this country had never seen, and the Conservatives have accelerated it.
Yeah.
The numbers are even bigger.
Blaming immigration for many woes across the UK, taking to X, saying immigration is the real reason for the housing crisis.
But the British population has risen by 10 million
since Tony Blair came to power, 6 million of that since the Tories came to power in 2010, and 85% of that directly down to immigration.
The Labour Party's plans to tackle all the border woes coming under attack in a new campaign by the Conservatives. The other dominant issue facing this election is healthcare, only second to cost of living in the latest YouGov polling, with waitlists at all-time highs. The proportion of people waiting more than 4 hours to see a doctor at A&Es in the UK hospitals, which has risen steadily over the past 14 years, that the ruling Conservative Party has been in power, going from 6% to 42% today, and a lot of it has been put down to staffing issues and strenuous working loads.
It was quite challenging working for the NHS. I think the best way to describe it is overworked and underpaid.
A large majority at the last election made it much harder for Sunak, Truss and Johnson to keep the entire government aligned since the last election, something that they will pay for on July 4. In London, Austin Pollock, 6 News.
Alright, and don't forget our live UK election coverage begins early on the morning of July 5. You can catch that right here on the 6 News YouTube channel. Back home now, and pilot Greg Lynn has been found guilty of one of 2 counts of murders in the Victorian High Country case. Campers Russell Hill and Carol Clay went missing in March of 2020, with Mr. Lynn charged with 2 counts of murder. He pleaded not guilty to both charges, with his lawyers arguing the deaths were as a result of the tragic accident. Yesterday afternoon, a jury found him guilty of the murder of Mrs. Clay, but not guilty of the murder of Mr. Hill. The sentencing process will begin when the case next returns to court on July 19. And that is 6 News for now. You can stay up to date by heading to our website or by following us on social media at SIXNewsAU. News is on the hour every hour here on 6 News. For now though, I'm Darby Travers.
If he doesn't like tough questions, or if any guest we have doesn't like the tough questions we pose, then I think that's on them, that's their problem. You don't think Australians are interested in whether their leader tells the truth or not? Because, I mean, surely...
You're not going to get many people outside of Gen Z voting for you.
I don't really want anyone outside Gen Z voting for me, to be quite frank.
Well, I don't know how you're going to win. Would you be willing to come back on 6 News? Why not just log off? Like, it's not compulsory to post.
To be able to have so many people to trust us, to bring them the exclusives, the analysis, the stories you don't see on any other platforms. How can you assure Queenslanders that they can get a roof over their heads? We have some breaking news for you. It was just a few short months until things started to change. Yeah, and that is the good news, that everyone did get off that Japan Airlines flight safe. Nonetheless, there are many key takeaways. Thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure, Austin. We were told to reveal the source for a response from the Premier. We did not do that. To break that down, those on the original plan. Our news, it's our country, and we bring you the facts of our world. I'll be back with you again next hour. Do take care.
We aren't pushing for a political agenda, we simply give you the facts. In Melbourne, and there are so many ways to celebrate. Top of the hour, every hour, these are the top stories we're following. Who doesn't love sport? And on 6 News, we cover it like no one else does. Fonz's fleets have begun leaving the country. Is the first Australian sitting state or territory leader to give a full in-person interview with 6 News. To have a trusted source to bring the exclusives, the analysis, the stories you just don't see on any other platforms.
On 6 News, we bring you the latest headlines and breaking stories live. Our team of journalists are on the ground across the country and around the world, keeping you informed with up-to-the-minute reporting every single day.
Top of the hour,
every hour. Thanks for joining us.
So in 2024, turn to 6 News, on the hour, every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 366 days of the year.
Is he speaking to his wife on the phone in his phone?
And Stephen have been able to play.
Prime Minister.
You talked about your view that this had gone on for too long. Do you think previous Prime Ministers, previous governments have been negligent to allow it to drag on so long instead of advocating as strongly as you've done?
Oh, look, what's important, I'm responsible for my job. My job is to advocate for Australian citizens. Chang Leia's home. Sean Turnella's home. One of the things that my government does is at times as well, we don't shout. We're not in a contest of machismo. What we do is we get things done. And my government advocated strategically, patiently, in a calibrated way, and we achieved this outcome.
Prime Minister, a couple of quick questions. Can you confirm that you expect to meet Mr Assange in the next day or so? And secondly, could you give us a sense...
Sorry, you expect, you didn't conclude...
Will you be meeting him in the next day or so? And also, what point did you actually realise that this was going to happen? You've been working on it for a couple of years. Was it a conversation with Joe Biden? Was a message sent from State Department of Foreign Affairs? How did that play out?
Well, it played out over a long period of time. I've said that I have raised it at every opportunity at the highest level. I know that I've received a message from the US ambassador here that they are also pleased that this has been resolved. The first time I raised it was with President Biden at the NATO summit in Madrid. I raised it also with other senior members of the US administration. But this was always the case, to be very clear, that because of the separation between the political representatives and the judiciary, this was always going to be something that required discussion, patient with the Department of Justice. And certainly over that period of time there has been an issue as well. I've exchanged very directly with Mr Assange's lawyers, as have our diplomatic representatives. And Mr Assange's lawyers have been very determined to achieve an outcome, and of course the nature of his incarceration in Belmarsh has meant that then communication had to then be got through. Stephen Smith, our High Commissioner, has visited him on a number of occasions. The details of the plea deal were worked through over a period of time. But what we have been focused on very clearly, and for some of the issues that have raised with me, it was the case that this was the only way that I could see a resolution being achieved. And the objective here was to conclude these matters. They have been concluded. They've been concluded in a way that has achieved the outcome that was sought, which is Julian Assange is now home here in Australia.
Just following up on Ms James's question, do you plan to meet with Mr Assange in coming days?
I've got Parliament tomorrow. So I'll be here tomorrow. I'm not going to assist. I'm aware of Mr. Assange's movements in coming days, but I'm not about to. That's a matter for his personal privacy. Obviously, he's been through a considerable ordeal. It's up to him when he makes a statement. I was pleased to speak with him.
Good evening, everyone. We are absolutely delighted to be home. It's a very emotional return home to Australia. It was a very long journey home to Australia. It started 2 days ago. Julian was released from bail in the UK early on Monday morning UK time. We had to spend 12 hours in Stansted Airport before we boarded a flight to Bangkok. Another 8 or 9 hours in Bangkok before we flew to Saipan, where Julian entered his plea. We are absolutely delighted, after a very long and complex negotiation with the US government, that we've reached this plea deal that enabled him to come home to Australia as a free man. The agreement is that he will spend no more time in prison. The terms of the plea deal are, unfortunately, that he, in order to achieve his freedom and to leave the high security prison in Belmarsh, he had to choose to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage for publishing evidence of US war crimes, human rights abuse. Guys, it's really hard to do this when there's so much noise going on in the background. Thank you very much. In order to win his freedom, Julian pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage for publishing evidence of US war crimes, human rights abuse and US wrongdoing around the world. This is journalism. This is the criminalisation of journalism. And while the plea deal does not set a judicial precedent, it's not a court decision, the prosecution itself sets a precedent that can be used against the rest of the media. It's important that journalists all around the world understand the dangerous precedent that this prosecution has set. An award-winning Australian journalist who's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for these publications has spent more than 5 years in a high-security prison because of this extradition request from the United States. We are absolutely thrilled that Julian is now home in Australia. I can say when we landed here in Australia, I became very emotional the moment we landed, and the Prime Minister was the first person to get on the phone to speak to Julian. Julian thanked him and the team and told the Prime Minister that he had saved his life. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Prime Minister Albanese, for his principled leadership, the statesmanship and diplomacy that he showed in leading the effort to bring Julian home to Australia. It was as opposition leader that he said enough is enough, that there was nothing to be served by Julian's ongoing incarceration. As Prime Minister, he kept his word. He raised it at the highest level at every single opportunity. He has continued to ask the US to bring this to an end, and his efforts completely changed the situation for Julian and enabled our negotiations with the US government that allowed us to reach this outcome. I also want to thank our ambassador to the US, Kevin Rudd, our former Prime Minister, whose relentless efforts in Washington, working together closely with us, with myself and my co-counsel Barry Pollock, completely changed our relationship with the US and completely changed the negotiations. Without his efforts and his adept diplomacy, we would not be in the position we are today, and Julian would not be home. I also want to thank Stephen Smith, our High Commissioner in London, who worked tirelessly, and the team at DFAT, the consular staff who really facilitated our trip home and were incredibly kind to Julian along the way. This is a huge win for Australia and for Australian democracy. This is a huge win for free speech. This is a huge win for Australia that our Prime Minister stood up to our ally, the United States, and demanded the return of an Australian citizen. And that Julian came home today is the product of 14 long years of legal battles, political advocacy and ongoing campaigning, not just by us, but by so many people in this community. A global movement was created around Julian and the need to protect free speech, and it's that global movement that has led to his release today. I really want to thank everyone who has joined us in this fight, who have supported us along the way, because without that support and the campaigning that's been done, we just wouldn't be in this position. Julian is incredibly grateful for the support that he's had from the Australian government and from the public here in Australia, and we're delighted that he's home. He's finally home. I'm going to invite we might take questions. I might just at the end, if that's okay, but I'd like to invite my US co-counsel Barry Pollock to come and address you about the plea deal.
Good evening. Earlier today in a courthouse in Saipan, we had a hearing that brought to a close a prosecution that never should have been brought. Julian Assange has, for so many years, sacrificed for freedom of speech and freedom of the press. He's sacrificed his own freedom. And finally, today, that tragic situation ended, and we are all grateful that Julian is back home in Australia where he belongs, back with Stella, back with his children, reunited with his father. It is unprecedented in the United States to use the Espionage Act to criminally prosecute a journalist or a publisher. It's in the more than 100-year history of that law, it has never been used in this fashion. It is certainly our hope that it will never again be used in this fashion. Julian spent years in Belmarsh. No one should spend a day in prison for giving the public newsworthy and important information. In this case, information that the United States government had committed war crimes, that there were civilian casualties exponentially greater than the United States government had admitted in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was definitely in the public's interest to have this information, and Julian provided it to the public. He performed a tremendous public service, not a crime. The problem with the Espionage Act is there is no First Amendment defense in the Espionage Act. It does, by its terms, not matter the reason why you publish. The U.S. for years, the U.S. government has claimed that these publications did great harm. Today in court, the United States government admitted that there is not a single person anywhere that they can produce that was actually harmed by these publications. Hopefully this is the end, not just of the case against Julian Assange, but the end of the case against journalism. Thank you.
I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Albanese, the officials who have been working in DFAT on securing Julian's release. I'd also like to thank the Australian people who have made this possible, because without their support, there would not be the political space to be able to achieve Julian's freedom. And that support is across the board. I thank the opposition for also supporting Julian's release. It took all of them. It took millions of people. It took people working behind the scenes, people protesting on the streets for days and weeks and months and years. And we achieved it. Julian wanted me to sincerely thank everyone. He wanted to be here. But you have to understand what he's been through. He needs time. He needs to recuperate. And this is a process. I ask you, please, to give us space, to give us privacy, to find our place, to let our family be a family before he can speak again at a time of his choosing. I think it's important to recognize that Julian's release and the breakthrough in the negotiations came at a time when there had been a breakthrough in the legal case in the UK, in the extradition, where the High Court had allowed permission to appeal. There was a court date set for the 9th and 10th of July, an upcoming court date in which Julian would be able to raise the First Amendment argument at the High Court. And it is in this context that things finally started to move. I think it revealed how uncomfortable the United States government is in fact of having these arguments aired, because this case, the fact is that this case is an attack on journalism, it's an attack on the public's right to know, and it should never have been brought. Julian should never have spent a single day in prison. But today we celebrate, because today Julian is free.
We'll take 10 minutes of questions, just address them to the individual, and I'll tell you when we're out last 3 or so.
I think the first question was Robertson. The return of Julian Assange has revived this huge debate about whether his activities were right or wrong. And we've seen political figures in the US and in Australia here say that he's no hero, that his disclosures put lives at risk. Some Democrats don't like the disclosures about Hillary Clinton, for instance. What's your response to this sort of fundamental argument that's been made against Julian Assange, that he put lives at risk, for instance, and that his disclosures were not in the public interest?
Well, to start with, there's no evidence of any actual harm, and that's exactly what the US government acknowledged in court today in Saipan. So there is no evidence that anyone was physically harmed as a result of those publications. The public interest in those publications is clear. Evidence of war crimes, that the US had not disclosed the extent of civilian casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan, the use of torture and other forms of human rights abuse around the world. There is no denying the public interest in WikiLeaks publications, which is reflected in the reasons why WikiLeaks has won the Walkley Award for Most Outstanding Contribution to Journalism, the Sydney Peace Prize, the fact that Julian's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize every year since those publications. So to suggest that this was not in the public interest, I don't understand the basis upon which they could possibly suggest that. And so I think this is clear.
Stella, do you have a question? That moment on the tarmac where you embraced Julian must have been incredibly surreal. Was that the moment you realised that this was over?
Yes, I was overcome by emotion when I first heard that there were crowds cheering that I didn't even know were there behind a fence because it was dark. And then I heard them cheer more and more and flashes, and then I turned the corner and then I saw that Julian was coming, and we embraced, and I mean, I think you've seen the pictures. I don't want to express in words what is obvious from the image.
Stella, what comes next with Julian Assange? Will this revitalize WikiLeaks, will this be a career in politics, or what have you? What's next?
Julian needs time to recover, to get used to freedom. Someone told me yesterday who had been through something similar that freedom comes slowly. And I want Julian to have that space to rediscover freedom slowly and quickly.
Yes, as one of my colleagues mentioned the Podesta files earlier, I think he may not have read them. Could you, now you have the opportunity, just remind us of how that actually performed the DNC and the corruption within? The Podesta files were really good for the Democratic National Congress, yes?
Look, there was clearly public interest in the DNC materials that was released by WikiLeaks, and in terms of the legality of those publications, there's a US court decision showing that it had the highest possible protection of the First Amendment. So from a principle point of view, people might not like the politics of any particular publication, but that publication is absolutely protected by the First Amendment, as US courts have found.
Ken, are there any post-release conditions for Julian parole periods? The US has said that he's banned from returning to the US, gag orders, anything like that. And can you and Barry give us a sense of the negotiations with the DOJ, particularly given Julian's strong view that he was not guilty of crime?
I think it's best Barry speaks to the terms of the plea deal.
There are absolutely no restrictions on Julian. The case against him is over. There is no gag order. There are no other restrictions. He is going to be able to go back to whatever life he chooses to build with Stella and his family. The negotiations were a protracted process that went on for several months, sort of in fits and starts. We were not close to any sort of a resolution until a few weeks ago, when the Department of Justice re-engaged, and there have been very intense negotiations over the last few weeks. One thing we were very clear about was that any resolution would have to end this matter, and that Julian would be free, that he was not going to do additional time in prison, he was not going to do time under supervision, he was not going to do time under a gag order. So that was one absolute requirement. Another significant point of negotiation was where the plea would be taken. Julian did not want to come to the United States in any form. Ultimately, obviously, we negotiated Saipan under conditions where he would be released in the UK. He would come to Saipan not as a prisoner of the United States or of the United Kingdom, and that we would come in and leave on the same day, which is exactly what happened. And other provisions of the plea that were very significant. The United States agreed that they are not going to bring any other charges against Julian for any conduct, any publications, any news gathering, anything at all that occurred prior to the time of the plea. So even if he had prevailed in the extradition proceeding, that would have just resolved this case. This resolves any possible case that the United States could bring against Julian for any subject matter. So that was obviously very significant to us.
Thank you. Jen and also Stella, you called yesterday your hopes for a pardon to be granted to Julian. How do you see that playing out? Would you like the Australian government to support that call? What could be possibly done to actually achieve that outcome in your view?
Look, I think today we celebrate Julian's freedom. Today is the day that the plea deal was approved by the judge. I think it's also a day where I hope journalists and editors and publishers everywhere realize the danger of this US case against Julian that criminalizes, that has secured a conviction for news gathering and publishing information that was in the public interest, that was true, that the public deserved to know. And that precedent now can and will be used in the future against the rest of the press. So it is in the interest of all of the press to seek for this current state of affairs to change through reform of the Espionage Act, through increased press protections, and yes, eventually, when the time comes, not today, a pardon.
Stella, can I ask, how hopeful and how confident are you that your husband will be pardoned? And what do you think has been at the absolute core of the shifting sands here that's enabled his release?
I think freedom of the press is in a very dangerous place. It's not evident that it will move towards more protections, but rather less. There needs to be a conscious and joint effort to push back, and that pushback should have resulted in the dropping of the case against Julian. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. That would have been the only good outcome for the press in general if the US government had abandoned this case entirely. Now you have the press in a as vulnerable position as Julian has been. And that came the day the indictment came down. Let's be clear about that. That didn't come down with this conviction. And frankly, that mobilization should have happened years ago. And that's what enabled the conviction.
So, is Mr. Assange?
I think he'll be pardoned if the press unite to push back against this precedent. Because it affects all of you. It affects your future ability to inform the public and to publish without fear.
Is Mr. Assange going to meet the Prime Minister in the coming days?
No comment.
Can we have 3 more questions? And then we're wrapping up.
Stella.
Well, what I can say from the phone call with the Prime Minister this afternoon when we landed is that he is delighted that Stella and Julian are both now in Australia, and we certainly hope that at some point they'll be able to meet.
Does Julian plan to keep going with WikiLeaks and publish more documents on journalism?
Look, he just arrived in Australia after being in a high security prison for over 5 years and a, how long? 72-hour flight or something like that. It's premature. Julian has to recover. That's the priority. And the fact is that Julian will always defend human rights, will always defend victims. He's always done that. And that's just part of who he is. He is deeply principled. And he remains deeply principled and unafraid.
Thank you very much, everybody.